When Rabbi Alex and I first moved in together, the first thing she wanted to do was go up and down the hall of our LA apartment and meet our neighbors. And I so loved that she wanted to do that, even though that thought of it scared me just a little bit. I'm from LA and she's from Cleveland, as you know. And she grew up with that unique brand of Midwestern friendliness and hospitality, the one you've overwhelmed my parents with already. Just kidding. And it's not that I didn't have that, and friendliness is something I hold core to my being. It's just that I think in any truly massive city, you're conditioned to keep your head down a little more and just not bother anybody. So here I am, nervous about knocking on people's doors, which would inevitably be the moment that they sat down for dinner. I told Alex that. She looked at me and said, "It's 2 o'clock on a Sunday." Alex was correctly eager and excited, and I know that deep down I was too, but I needed that little push, that extra reminder to appreciate how exciting it is to get to know your neighbors. Sukkot is the neighbor holiday. Not only are we meant to invite our family, friends, community, neighbors over, we're meant to invite the poor and the hungry, and we're meant to invite Ushpizin, 7 of our biblical ancestors, into our sukkah. It's an interesting change of pace from the internal spiritual work of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which emphasizes individual reflection. Sukkot comes now to literally get us out of ourselves. It's time to get out of our heads and out of the house. It's time to get out into nature, out into community. So why build a sukkah? The Torah tells us to live in Sukkot for 7 days to remember that God had us dwell in booths as we wandered through the wilderness. But is there more to it than that? Why and what exactly does God want us to remember? I think the answer has something to do with vulnerability. When you're wandering through the wilderness, you feel vulnerable. And so you turn to sources of support like God and community. Because you don't have the reassurance of fortification or wealth or an abundance of food and water to make you feel safe and secure. So maybe Sukkot is responding to the danger of feeling exactly what I felt in that moment from within the comfort of my nice, warm apartment, that I didn't actually need anybody else because I had everyone and everything I needed right there. Maybe that's why God wants us to remember our time in the wilderness, to literally make ourselves a tent in our backyard or driveway if we're fortunate enough to have this space, and experience what it means to feel vulnerable, to look out into the night sky through a permeable schach roof and gaze at the stars, at eternity, and feel God's sheltering presence, the Shekhinah, protecting us, taking comfort in community, because we need each other more than we know. It's easy to forget. That's why we need to remember. Put another way, the rabbis say that on Sukkot we're meant to oseh sukkato keva uveito arai. Make your temporary dwelling permanent and your permanent dwelling temporary. In other words, flip our notion of what's lasting and what's fleeting. It's not our physical homes that endure forever. It's this magnificent world all around us, where we can watch leaves change color and get caught in the rain a lot more than I ever used to. And it's not our own lives and our own personal business that lasts forever, it's community that endures. It's the spiritual bonds created only within the context of relationship. This holiday comes to literally break down the walls we build between ourselves and others, between ourselves and the natural world, so that we feel vulnerable enough to understand what's truly lasting in life. We may be aware that we're supposed to sit and eat in the sukkah. And if we're really go-getters, we might even sleep in the sukkah. But I think the most important mitzvah we can perform in the sukkah is to talk to somebody. Sit and have conversation. The Talmud explains that a sukkah has to be more than 10 cubits high because the kruvim, the angelic cherub statue that decorated the cover of the ancient Ark of the Covenant, screened the cover with their outspread wings from 10 cubits above. The Hebrew word used for screen, sochechim, is the same word used for schach. Here's why that matters. The Torah says that God would appear to Moses from between the Keruvim, the cherubs, who were facing each other. To really feel the Shekhinah, God's presence in the sukkah, we have to face each other like the cherubs. We have to sit down for a meal and conversation with neighbors, because that's where God appears. But I want to return to vulnerability, because you might push back on that. Are we really meant to feel vulnerable? Isn't Sukkot a festive celebration? The Torah tells us that on this occasion, V'haita ach sameach, you shall have nothing but joy. Haita ach sameach. How can we be vulnerable and joyful at the same time? This is where we have to ask ourselves what the difference is between joy and fun. And no one puts it more beautifully than Rabbi Alan Liu, who writes about Sukkot. And when we speak of joy here, we are not speaking of fun. Joy is a deep release of the soul, and it includes death and pain. Joy is any feeling fully felt, any experience we give our whole being to. We are conditioned to choose pleasure and to reject pain, but the truth is, any moment of our life fully inhabited, any feeling fully felt, any immersion in the full depth of life can be the source of deep joy. In other words, you might think that when Sukkot rolls around, we have to build walls that keep all the intrusive, negative emotions out, unless joy is something much deeper than fun, unless joy can contain sorrow. We already know that Sukkot is about weakening our walls, not strengthening them. So what if we treat every emotion we naturally feel as welcome guests into our sukkah, even when those guests are sadness, loneliness, and pain? And that brings us back to vulnerability. Jack Ehrlich, a staff member of Congregation Tekiah in Detroit, makes this exact point by putting Rabbi Alan Liu, contemporary rabbi, in conversation with the 13th century Sufi mystic and poet, Rumi, who wrote a poem called The Guest House. But for our purposes, let's envision the guest house as a sukkah. The poem goes like this. This being human is a guest house. Every morning, a new arrival, a joy, a depression, a meanness. Some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they are a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whatever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. And it ends, again, with recognizing the beyond, which for our purposes, let's call God, or the divine. God wants us to dwell in tents to tap into vulnerability, because with vulnerability comes openness, openness to meeting your neighbors, openness to greeting the full range of human emotion as welcome guests here to teach us something. If only we open the door. Openness to sensing the presence of God as it envelops us with the warm embrace of a sukkah. This Sukkot, I want to wish everyone nothing but joy, ach sameach, in the deepest sense of that word. And what more appropriate way to ring in Sukkot than with the joyous celebration of our adult B'nai Mitzvah class reunions, with cohorts of neighbors who chose to celebrate their B'nai Mitzvah together, because life's milestones are so much sweeter when celebrated in community. And I also want to welcome two very special Ushpizin to B'nai Yeshurun, my mom and dad. My mom also participated in an adult B'nai Mitzvah cohort back home, so it's all the more special for them to be joining us this Shabbat. I've regaled them with so many stories of just how much we love this community, because I used to just come to Cleveland to visit. It was a temporary dwelling, which on Sukkot we make permanent. So please feel free to come up to my parents and say, welcome home. Shabbat Shalom.